Where was I now? Yes, Paul's words show the elevation of his apostolic ministry to the same level as that of Peter, recognized by such as James, Cephas, and John. Cephas is Peter. James is named first as the leader of the church at that time. It was he who rendered the final decision at the council in Jerusalem in Acts chapter 15. That's correct. Next, Cephas is mentioned. This is Peter's other name. He, along with John, was a part of Jesus' earthly ministry, a special part of it. 3 people were included: Peter, James, and James' brother John. That's right, who got martyred. Together, they were considered as leaders in their own right. James is mentioned first when a particular act of the church is referred to. However, Peter or Cephas is mentioned first by Paul when speaking of the missionary function of the church. Concerning these 3, Paul notes that they seemed to be pillars. Vincent's word study says that this is better translated as who are in repute as pillars. Not seemed, but are in repute as pillars. The term seemed to be gives the impression that such really wasn't the case, and that was not Paul's intent at all. His intent was that people understood that they were in repute and that he was affirming that, not trying to question it. However, they were the pillars, and the reputation noted this, okay? The word pillars gives the obvious mental picture of those who support a body or an organization. They would be those who kept the organization strong and properly structured. In other words, Paul's naming of these 3 is intended to show that these great representatives were in full approval of his ministry. All 3 of them, the big pillars, okay, they perceived, as Paul says, they perceived the grace that had been given to him, meaning Paul. Christ had set his seal of approval on Paul way back in Acts chapter 9 and on his ministry. And they therefore gave both him and Barnabas, his words, the right hand of fellowship. So Paul, and what eventually happened with Paul and Barnabas? They had a disagreement and they split up. But even that, we'll see this again in the book of Acts in 10 years when we get to it again. But the word in the Greek there for the argument between Paul and Barnabas is paroxysm. Okay, they had a paroxysm, which means that they almost came to blows. They were really, really angry at each other. And it was over Mark. You know, Mark went with them on the first missionary journey, and it doesn't say why he left them, but he left them. And you can figure he probably got homesick or, whatever. I don't like this food. Whatever it was something that upset Paul enough where he said, he ain't going with me again. But on the second missionary trip, they decided that Barnabas did, I want to take Mark with us. He's okay. And Paul was like, I'm not going with him again. He'd already made up his mind. And that's when they got into this paroxysm. They were in just a heated argument. Now, Mark is later mentioned in Timothy, right? Or maybe Titus by, what's that, Timothy? By Paul. And he says he's useful for me in my ministry. So they had reconciled, but Barnabas is never mentioned again by Paul in a positive light. So they probably never healed that wound. And that's something for Christians to consider in their own walk. When you have a problem with another Christian, is, get over it. And then just, if you're not suited to be around each other, don't be around each other. I mean, you don't have to be fighting each other. Just cut off the fellowship and, I'll see you in heaven and this will all be behind us, and leave it at that. It's kind of a lesson, an unsaid lesson in the Bible. But the thing about what happened there, when Barnabas and Paul separated, what happened from that? The gospel went twice as fast. That's right. Barnabas took Mark and he says, I'm leaving. He took him and they went off to the island Sicily, or Crete. And then Paul and Silas went in another direction. And so twice the amount of work got done. So even what seems to be for bad turned out to be for good. Okay, there are lessons all through the book of Acts like that. It is, what a marvelous book. Anyway, we'll go on.